Chapter 1. The Train of Sorrows. The shrill whistle of the midnight train sliced through the frozen prairie like a wounded animal's cry, echoing across endless miles of snow and sagebrush. Lanterns swayed on the creaking wooden platform of the little frontier town, their glow hazy in the thick curtain of falling snow. Steam hissed from the iron beast as it ground to a halt, filling the night air with smoke and the metallic screech of brakes. A small crowd had gathered at the station, farmers in worn coats, women clutching shawls tight, children clutching their mothers' skirts. The arrival of a train was always an event in a town this small. It brought news, supplies, and sometimes people. Tonight, it carried someone who would soon become the center of every whisper in town. Her name was Alma Whitlock, though no one here yet knew it. She stepped down from the train, her boots sinking into slush, her worn carpetbag held tightly in gloved hands. A pale face framed by a wool bonnet emerged from the smoke, her eyes wide, her breath quick in the freezing air. Her heart should have been full of hope. She had traveled hundreds of miles, leaving everything familiar behind to meet the man who had promised her a new beginning. But her heart was not hopeful tonight. It was breaking. Even before the train had screeched to a halt, Alma knew something was wrong. She had searched the crowd for a face she recognized, the face from the faded photograph sent to her months ago, the man who had written to her faithfully. But there was no sign of him. Instead, she saw curiosity in the eyes of strangers and pity in some of the women's faces. As her boots touched the platform, she heard the whispers. "That's her. Poor girl. She doesn't know yet." Alma's stomach turned to ice. She clutched her bag tighter, her fingers trembling inside her gloves. "What do you mean?" she finally whispered, turning to a stocky man who had been watching her with too much interest. He spat into the snow, his voice gruff. "She that came for us sent word yesterday. Said he don't want you anymore." The words cut deeper than a knife. Alma's breath hitched, her eyes burning as if the cold had finally seeped into her very soul. All those months of careful letters, of promises scratched out on ink across paper that smelled faintly of tobacco and dust. All the night she stayed awake by lamplight, daring to believe she might find happiness at last. Gone, shattered in a single sentence. The crowd watched her reaction like vultures circling a wounded creature. Some women shook their heads, muttering about men with no honor. Others smirked knowingly. It wasn't uncommon for mail-order brides to be rejected upon arrival, but knowing it had happened before did nothing to soften Alma's humiliation. The train whistled again, preparing to depart. Its smoke rolled over the platform like a ghostly shroud. Alma stared after it in panic. That train had been her lifeline, the tether connecting her old life to this uncertain new one. Now it was leaving her stranded, unwanted, in a place where she had no friends, no family, no future. Her knees wavered, and for a moment she feared she might collapse right there in the snow. But she forced herself to stand tall, to lift her chin though her eyes burned with unshed tears. If she broke here in front of these strangers, she would never piece herself together again. And then she saw him. At the far end of the platform, leaning against a wooden post, stood a man apart from the rest. His long coat flapped against the wind, the brim of his hat shadowing his face. A gleam of silver caught the lamplight. The badge pinned to his chest. The sheriff. He watched her with an intensity that unsettled her. His eyes were pale, sharp and steady, as if he were seeing through the mask of composure she clung to, straight into her raw and wounded heart. He did not mock. He did not pity. He simply saw her. Alma's breath caught. She felt exposed, though she could not explain why. The train gave a final scream and lurched forward, its wheels clattering as it rolled back into the night. Alma's last chance of escape was gone. She was trapped in this town, and already the subject of every whisper in town. The sheriff moved. Slowly, deliberately, he pushed himself off the post and began walking toward her. His boots crunched on the snow, the crowd parting as he approached. Conversations hushed. All eyes followed him. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried himself with quiet authority. Though his face was half hidden by the shadow of his hat, he could see the lines of solitude etched into it. This was not a man who laughed easily, nor one who welcomed company. Yet when he stopped before her, his gaze softened, just slightly. "You've no place to go, do you?" His voice was low, deep, like distant thunder. Alma swallowed hard. Her lips parted, but for a moment no sound came out. Finally she whispered, "No, sir, it seems I don't." The sheriff's jaw tightened, and something flickered in his pale eyes. Pain, loneliness, perhaps recognition of something in her that mirrored his own emptiness. He tipped his hat, his voice gruff but steady. "Then you best come with me." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The sheriff was a man of distance, known for keeping to himself, known for living alone on the edge of town in a cabin few dared to visit. That he would offer shelter to a rejected bride, tongues would wag for weeks. Alma hesitated. Every instinct warned her not to trust easily. Men had lied before, had abandoned her before. And yet, the night was bitter cold, and the thought of wandering it alone chilled her blood. Her gaze locked with his. There was something in those steel-gray eyes, something both dangerous and oddly reassuring. He was not offering kindness, not exactly. It felt more like protection. She nodded, her voice trembling. "Thank you, Sheriff." He gave a curt nod in return and turned, expecting her to follow. The crowd watched in silence as Alma, her head held high despite the storm of emotions raging inside her, walked after him, through the snow-covered streets. The town fell behind them, its lamplight dimming into darkness. The sheriff's stride was long and sure, his presence as solid as the snow-crusted earth beneath them. Alma tried to steady her racing thoughts. Who was this man really, and why did she feel an odd sense of both safety and fear in his company? When they reached the edge of town, his cabin came into view. It was sturdy but solitary, standing against the wind like its master. Smoke curled from the chimney, carrying the scent of pine wood. The sheriff opened the door for her without a word, and Alma stepped inside. Warmth enveloped her instantly, chasing the cold from her bones. A fire roared in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the simple room. A wooden table, a worn air chair, a rifle propped against the wall. His life was plain, functional, lonely. Alma set her carpetbag on the floor, her heart still pounding. She turned to thank him again, but stopped. The sheriff was watching her, not the way men usually watch women, but with an intensity that made her breath cut. His eyes seemed to glow faintly in the firelight, too bright, too sharp. For an instant, she thought she saw something wild flicker there, something not entirely human. She blinked, and it was gone. He looked away, shrugging off his coat. "You can stay here tonight. Tomorrow we'll figure what's next." Alma nodded, though her mind spun with questions. She had no idea that the man who had rescued her carried a secret that could change everything. For the sheriff Colt was more than a man. He was a shifter, and the wolf inside him had already recognized Alma as someone it could never let go.
Before we dive into Chapter 2, let me ask you this. Are you finding this story interesting? If you are, then you're exactly the kind of person I create these videos for. So hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. It's the best way to make sure you never miss the next videos of this incredible journey. Chapter 2. The Sheriff's Burden. The wind howled like a hungry beast outside the cabin. rattling the shutters and piling snowdrifts higher against the door. Inside, the fire snapped and crackled, but the warmth it offered could not drive away the heavy silence that had settled between Alma and the sheriff. She sat stiffly on the edge of the armchair, her hands folded tight in her lap, her bonnet still tied beneath her chin, though her cheeks were flushed from the heat of the hearth. The events of the night pressed on her chest like a stone, rejected, humiliated, cast adrift in a town that already whispered about her. If not for this man, she might still be standing on that frozen platform, swallowed by despair. But who was he? Sheriff Colt removed his hat and set it on the table with deliberate care. His coat followed, slung across the back of a chair. Without those layers of shadow, Alma could finally see him more clearly. His hair was dark, threaded with silver at the temples. His face was rough-hewn, weathered by years of wind and sun, the sort of face that carried its own stories in every line. He moved with a predator's grace, quiet but commanding, as if every step was measured, every gesture controlled. And those eyes, cold steel gray, watchful, unrelenting. They unsettled her, and yet she could not look away. "You've come a long way," Colt said at last, his voice low and gravelly. He stood near the fire, leaning one hand on the mantel. "Most women wouldn't dare travel so far on their own." Alma's fingers tightened in her lap. "I wasn't supposed to be alone," she whispered, bitterness threading through the quiet words. A muscle ticked in his jaw, but he said nothing. Instead, he picked up a kettle from the hearth and poured steaming water into a tin cup, dropping in a pinch of dried herbs. He set it on the table before her. "Drink. It'll take the chill off." Alma hesitated, but the warmth of the cup seeping into her gloves was too inviting to resist. She took a careful sip, letting the earthy bitterness spread across her tongue, though it did little to wash down the ache in her chest. Colt lowered himself into the chair opposite her, his broad frame filling the small space. For a moment, he simply studied her. Alma shifted under the weight of his gaze, feeling as though he could see through the thin layers of dignity she clung to. "You've got no family waiting here?" Colt asked finally. She shook her head, her throat tightening. No, just him, the man who changed his mind. Her voice faltered, but she pressed on, refusing to let it crack. "I gave up everything I knew, sold what little I had. There's nothing to go back to." A shadow flickered across his face, one she almost missed. Pain. Recognition. He leaned back, the chair creaking under his weight. "Then you understand." "Understand what?" she asked, frowning. His eyes lifted to hers, sharp as a wolf's gaze catching moonlight. "What it means to have nowhere else to go." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken truth. Alma shivered, not from the cold, but from something in his tone. Loneliness. A loneliness so deep it seemed to echo inside her own chest. Colt stood suddenly, as though he'd said too much. He busied himself with the fire, adding another log, his movements rougher than before. The sparks flared, lighting his face in a wash of amber. For the briefest instant, Alma saw something strange. The reflection of the flames in his eyes shimmered unnaturally bright, as though another presence stirred within him, something wild, something fierce. She blinked, and it was gone. "You can take the bed," he said brusquely, still facing the fire. "I'll extend, I manage here." Almic's mouth opened to protest, but the words tangled on her tongue. She did not want to be a burden, not to this man who had already given her shelter. Yet there was no denying the exhaustion weighing down her body, the way her limbs ached from the long train ride, the sting of humiliation still raw in her soul. "Thank you," she said softly. He gave a curt nod, not looking at her. Alma rose and carried her carpet bag to the small room beyond the hearth. The bed was plain but sturdy, with quilts neatly folded at the foot. She sat on the edge, her hands trembling as she untied her bonnet and set it aside. For the first time since stepping off the train, she let herself breathe. But as she lay back against the pillow, the weight of the night pressed down again. She thought of the man who had promised her a future, who had abandoned her without shame. Tears burned at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them away. She would not cry, not tonight. Through the thin walls she could hear Colt moving about, the scrape of a chair, the shift of heavy boots, and once faintly a sound that sent a strange chill down her spine. A low, guttural growl. It was gone as quickly as it had come, swallowed by the crackle of the fire. Alma squeezed her eyes shut, telling herself it was only her imagination, only the storm outside playing tricks on her weary mind. But deep inside, she knew there was something about Sheriff Colt that was not as it seemed. And as the snowstorm raged on, sealing her fate in this lonely cabin, Alma had no idea just how dangerous and how vital this man would become to her future. For Colt's burden was not just solitude, it was the beast he carried inside, a beast that had already chosen her.
Chapter 3. Strangers in the Snow. The morning broke gray and merciless, the kind of dawn that blurred the line between night and day. Snow still fell, soft and steady, blanketing the world in silence. The storm hadn't relented, it had only thickened its hold on the prairie, smothering the cabin in drifts so high they swallowed half the windows. Alma stirred awake beneath the rough quilt, her body stiff from exhaustion and the tension of the night before. For a moment, she did not remember where she was. The plain wooden ceiling above her, the smell of smoke and pine, the faint crackle of a dying fire. It was not her home, not the home she had left behind, nor the home she had been promised. Then it came back to her in a rush. The train, the rejection, the whispers, the sheriff's quiet offer. Sheriff Colt. Her chest tightened at the memory of his eyes in the firelight, so piercing they had seemed to burn through her, so strange she had wondered if her weary mind had been deceiving her. She rolled onto her side, pulling the quilt tighter, and listened. The cabin was quiet, too quiet. Then she heard it, the scrape of boots across the floorboards, the muffled sound of wood being split outside. Colt was already awake. Alma rose slowly, smoothing her skirts as best she could. The small room held only the essentials, a narrow bed, a wooden chest at the foot, a peg on the wall where she had hung her bonnet. No frills, no comfort beyond necessity. It spoke of a man who lived simply, perhaps deliberately so, a man who expected no company. She stepped carefully into the main room. The fire had burned low, but the air still held warmth. Colt's coat was gone from its hook by the door. For a moment, Alma allowed herself to wander the space with her eyes. Everything was neat, almost too neat. The table scrubbed clean, the rifle polished, the chair pushed squarely into place. Order was his companion, she realized. Order and solitude. The sound of the door opening startled her. She turned quickly as Colt stepped back inside, snow clinging to his shoulders, his breath a cloud in the frigid air. He carried an armful of split logs, which he set by the hearth, before glancing at her. "You're awake." His voice was the same as before, low, steady, with that rumble beneath it that seemed to linger in the bones. "Yes," she said softly,
folding her hands before her. "I didn't mean to sleep so late. It's early enough," he replied, crouching to stack the fire and coax the flames higher. "Storm's still thick. Best stay indoors a while." Alma nodded, though unease prickled at her. Staying indoors meant staying here, with him, a stranger who had shown her more mercy than anyone else in this town, yet a stranger all the same. "Do you live here alone?" she asked, her voice tentative. Colt paused, the match in his hand flaring brighter than the flames it lit. His eyes flicked toward her, then back to the fire. "Always have." Always. The word sat heavy between them. Alma thought of the nights she had spent dreaming of companionship, of letters that had promised warmth and partnership. And here was a man who had chosen solitude so completely that even the walls of his cabin seemed to echo with it. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, surprising herself. "For what?" he frowned. "For intruding," her fingers twisted in her skirts. "You didn't ask for company, and yet here I am, with nowhere else to go." Colt stood to his full height, the fire blazing behind him, casting him in stark silhouette. For a long moment he said nothing, his gray eyes studying her the way a man might study the horizon for signs of a storm. "You're not intruding," he said at last. His tone was gruff, but something softer threaded through it. "This isn't a town that shows kindness. Someone ought to." Alma's breath caught. The words were simple, yet in them she heard an echo of her own longing for a place, for a hand that did not turn away. The silence stretched, filled only by the crackle of fire and the soft hiss of snow against the windows. Then Colt moved toward the table. "Hungry?" Her stomach answered before her mouth could. She nodded, embarrassed. He ladled porridge from a pot into 2 tin bowls, setting one before her. The meal was plain, but Alma ate gratefully, each bite easing the hollow ache inside. Colt ate with quiet efficiency, his movements steady, unhurried. He did not fill the silence with words, and somehow that felt like a relief. Still, Alma's thoughts churned. She dared to glance at him, to study the man who had taken her in. His face was hard, but not cruel, weathered, but not careless. There was something caged about him, something held back, as though he were a man carved from stone and yet restless underneath the surface. When the bowls were empty, Colt stood. "Need to check the drifts," he said, pulling on his coat. "Make sure we're not snowed in." Alma rose quickly. "I'll come with you." He hesitated, his eyes narrowing. "Storm's not fit for walking." "I won't stay penned inside all day," she replied, surprising herself with the steel in her voice. "I can manage." A flicker passed across his face, disapproval, perhaps, or maybe something else. Then he nodded once curtly. "Stay close." The cold hit her like a wall when they stepped outside. The snow was knee-deep in places, the wind sharp enough to sting her cheeks. But Alma lifted her chin and followed, her boots crunching into the frozen ground. Colt moved with ease of someone born to this land, his stride steady even against the wind. They circled the cabin, inspecting the drifts piled high against its sides. Colt used a shovel to carve paths, his muscles taut beneath the heavy coat. Alma tried to help, but her hands quickly numbed, and the shovel felt too heavy. Still, she refused to give in to weakness. Colt watched her struggle for a moment, then took the shovel gently from her hands. "You'll freeze." "I can manage," she said again, though her lips trembled. His eyes held hers, unreadable. "You don't have to." The words lingered, softer than the wind, and Alma felt her resolve waver. She lowered her gaze, retreating a step as he turned back to his work. For a moment, she simply watched him, the way he moved with strength and precision, the way the snow seemed to bend around him. When the paths were clear enough, he gestured her back toward the cabin. The warmth inside was almost overwhelming,
after the bitter air. Alma removed her gloves, flexing stiff fingers, and glanced at him. "You're used to being alone," she said quietly. "Yes. And yet, you let me stay." Colt's jaw tightened. He removed his coat, hanging it carefully. "Storm like this, no one should be left outside." It was an explanation, but not the truth. Alma sensed that much. He hadn't just offered her shelter because of the storm. There was something else, something unspoken, binding him to her presence. She did not press, though her curiosity burned. Instead, she sat by the fire once more, letting its warmth seep into her bones. As the day wore on, the storm showed no sign of easing. They passed the hours in silence, broken only by small exchanges, Colt offering her tea, Alma mending a loose seam in her glove, Colt whittling a piece of wood with a steady hand. The quiet between them was not comfortable, not yet, but it was no longer unbearable. Two strangers in the snow, bound by circumstance, each carrying their own burdens, each wary of the other, yet drawn together by something neither could name. That night, as Alma lay awake listening to the storm batter the walls, she thought of Colt in the other room, of his loneliness, his silence, his steady presence, of the way his eyes had softened just once when he told her she wasn't intruding. And though fear still clung to her, fear of the town, of her future, and of the strange flickers she thought she had seen in his gaze, she felt a small spark of something she had not felt in a long time. Not hope, not yet, but the beginning of it. For in this storm, in this lonely cabin on the edge of the world, Alma and Colt were no longer entirely alone. They were strangers still, but strangers fated to walk the same snowbound path, whether they wished it or not.
Chapter 4. Whispers of the Past. The storm finally loosened its grip 2 days later, though the land it left behind looked nothing like the one Alma had first stepped into. The prairie was buried, the cabins and rooftops hunched beneath heavy snow, the dirt paths erased as though no soul had ever crossed them. The world had been remade in white silence, beautiful yet merciless. Alma stood by the window, her breath fogging the glass as she traced the faint outlines of town in the distance. The church spire barely rose above the snowdrifts. A rider struggled down the main street, his horse moving slow, half-sunken. Life was stirring again, but it was life muffled, cautious, worn down by the storm. Behind her, Colt's boots sounded against the floor. He had been silent most of the morning, moving with that same controlled rhythm as always, splitting logs, repairing the latch on the back door, checking the rifle. He was a man who filled silence with tasks, not words. But Alma could feel the tension in him now. Not the easy kind, not the storm-born worry of keeping them both warm. This was different. A strain that lived in the set of his shoulders, in the way his eyes flicked toward town, but never lingered long. "You'll be wanting to go back soon," he said finally. His voice startled her. It had been hours since he'd spoken. She turned from the window. Back? To town. He didn't meet her gaze, only tightened the strap on his holster. "Storm's over. Folks'll be expecting you." The word expecting made her flinch. Alma thought of the faces at the depot, the whispers of the women, the way the sheriff had stood as a barrier between her and their scorn. "I don't know that anyone expects me," she said softly. Colt stilled. Then, slowly, he looked at her. His eyes were sharp again, too sharp. Everyone in this town expects something, even if it ain't kindness. His tone was harsher than before, but Alma didn't recoil. Instead, she studied him with quiet curiosity. "And what do they expect of you?" The question caught him. He shifted, jaw tightening. For a long while he didn't answer, and Alma thought he would leave it at that, walling himself off the way he always did. But at last he said, "That depends who you ask." It wasn't enough.
Alma's heart beat faster, driven by the same pull that had been gnawing at her since the moment she met him. There was something in Colt's silence that begged to be known, even if he fought to keep it buried. She stepped closer, her voice low. "Then tell me, who are you, Sheriff Colt? Truly?" The air between them seemed to shift. For the first time since she had entered his cabin, Colt's composure cracked. His eyes flashed, not with anger, but with something older, heavier, like a wound reopened. "Careful, Alma." His voice was barely more than a whisper, but it carried the weight of warning. "Why?" she pressed, though her pulse quickened. "What is it you don't want me to know?" His gaze held hers, fierce and unyielding. Then, with a suddenness that made her breath catch, he turned away. He paced to the hearth, bracing one hand on the mantel, as though steadying himself against an invisible blow. "There are things buried out here," he said at last, his voice rough. "Things that don't stay dead. This town, it remembers. And it whispers." Alma felt a chill run through her, colder than the snow outside. He didn't turn, but his words kept coming, slow and heavy, as though dragged up from somewhere he'd sworn never to return to. "Before I was sheriff, before this cabin, before I swore to keep order, I was something else. Someone else. And folks here, some fear it, some hate it, some don't speak of it at all, but they remember." Her lips parted, but no sound came. She wanted to ask, "What were you?" But the words stuck in her throat. Colt finally turned back to her, and for a heartbeat, Alma swore the air itself shifted around him. His eyes, those gray, storm-shadowed eyes, seemed almost inhuman, as though something flickered in their depths that no man should carry. He blinked, and it was gone. He was only Colt again. A weary sheriff, a man worn by solitude. But Alma knew she hadn't imagined it. Her chest tightened, torn between fear and a strange pull that only deepened the longer she looked at him. She had seen loneliness before. She had lived it. But Colt's loneliness was different. It wasn't just that he was alone. It was that he had been set apart. "Whispers," she echoed softly, her voice trembling. "About you?" Colt's jaw worked. He didn't answer, not directly. Instead, he crossed the room, pulling on his coat with abrupt movements. "I need to check on town. Make sure folks dug themselves out. No one buried in drifts. You'd best stay here." And just like that, he was gone, the door slamming against the cold. Alma stood in the silence he left behind, her heart pounding. She pressed a hand to her chest as though to steady herself, but the questions only grew louder in her mind. Who was Colt really? What past haunted him so fiercely he could barely look her in the eye? And why, when she should be afraid, did she feel drawn closer still? The storm outside had passed, but inside this cabin, another was just beginning.
Chapter 5. The Town's Suspicion. The snow had quieted into a brittle hush, the kind that made each sound, boot against ice, creak of wood, flap of a shutter, echo twice as loud. Colt's horse cut a narrow path into town that morning, its hooves sinking deep where the storm had buried the world. Alma walked beside him, her steps uneven but determined, her borrowed cloak pulled tight against the bite of the wind. He had told her to stay behind. She had refused. The closer they came, the more the town revealed itself. Roofs sagging under snow, chimneys coughing thin streams of smoke, windows rimmed in frost. Men labored with shovels, clearing paths that only seemed to fill again with the next gust. Children darted between drifts, their laughter sharp and fleeting in the cold air. But when eyes lifted and caught sight of Colt and Alma, the rhythm of work slowed, shovels stilled, laughter cut short. Whispers began. "Sheriff's brought her here,"
Didn't think he'd keep her. Storm or no storm, some things don't belong. Alma felt each word like a stone against her chest. She had braced herself for stares, for disapproval, but the weight of it, the way their eyes tracked her as though she were an intruder in their snowbound order, struck harder than she had expected. Colt's stride never faltered. His face was unreadable, carved from the same silence that ruled his cabin. Yet Alma noticed how his hand hovered near the edge of his coat where his revolver rested at his side. Not in threat, never in threat, but in quiet warning. They stopped first at the general store. Inside, the air was warmer, heavy with the smell of kerosene and leather. Ezra, the shopkeeper, stood behind the counter, his brows lifting when the door creaked open. "Sheriff," his tone was polite but tight. His gaze flicked toward Alma. "And company." "Supplies," Colt said simply. Ezra moved slowly, gathering salt, flour, coffee. Each item thumped against the counter with more weight than necessary. Alma kept her hands folded, aware of how the man's eyes lingered on her, not with kindness, but with calculation, as if weighing what manner of woman had landed in the sheriff's care. When Colt paid, Ezra leaned forward, lowering his voice, though Alma could still hear every word. "Storm's one thing, Sheriff. Shelter's another. Folks'll start talkin' if she stays longer." "They already are," Colt replied evenly, his tone like steel under snow. Ezra hesitated, then nodded once, as though retreating from a line he dared not cross. Still, the message was clear. Alma was tolerated, but only just. The rest of the day followed in much the same pattern. At the blacksmith's, eyes lingered too long. At the post, voices hushed as Colt entered, then rose again the moment he left. The undertone was constant, thick as the snowdrifts, suspicion. Alma felt it coil tighter with each passing moment, a noose drawn not just around her, but around Colt too. She could not tell if it was her presence that caused the town to bristle, or if it was him, if the whispers she had heard in the cabin were alive here, spoken behind hands and shutters, shaping how these people looked at their sheriff. By the time they returned to the cabin, dusk had settled, painting the snow in shades of violet and gray. Alma's hands were raw from the cold. She sank into the chair by the fire, watching Colt hang his coat with the same deliberate care as always. "They don't want me there," she said at last. Her voice trembled, though she fought to keep it steady. Colt paused, his back to her. "This town doesn't want much of anyone. They only know how to keep what little they've got." "But it isn't just me," Alma pressed, leaning forward. "It's you. The way they looked at you. The way they looked at us." For a moment silence stretched, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Then Colt turned, his eyes shadowed in the dim light. "They remember what they want to remember, and they forget what they're told to forget. That's how towns survive out here, by choosing what truth they'll carry." Alma's breath caught. "And what truth do they carry about you?" His gaze held hers, steady, unflinching, and for the briefest moment she thought he might tell her, that he might unburden the weight she felt pressing at the edges of his silence. But then he looked away, toward the snow-dark window. "Best let whispers stay whispers," he murmured. Alma sat back, her pulse quickening. The fire snapped, sending sparks up the chimney, and in the silence that followed, she realized something with sudden clarity. It wasn't only the town that was suspicious. It was Colt himself.
Chapter 6. A Wolf in the Night. The night had a heaviness about it, the kind that seemed to press down from the sky itself, suffocating in its silence. The prairie lay buried under the storm's cruel gift, its endless white expanse glittering faintly beneath the pale light of a waxing moon. From the cabin window, Alma had watched that moon climb higher and higher until its glow no longer felt comforting but intrusive, like a lantern held aloft in a graveyard. Sleep would not come, not after the way the town had looked at her that day, not after the whispers that trailed her every step, and not after the way Colt had avoided her questions yet again. His silence weighed more heavily on her now than ever before. It was not just a silence of words, but of truths. She lay on the narrow bed, her eyes tracing the shadows that stretched across the low rafters above, the quilt pulled to her chin. Yet each time she closed her eyes, her mind replayed the stairs in town, the way Ezra's voice had dropped, the way the blacksmith's hammer had paused mid-swing, the way children had hushed their laughter at the sight of her beside the sheriff. It wasn't only they distrusted. It was him. And though Colt had never admitted it, Alma knew it was tied to the whispers he had spoken of by the fire, whispers of a past buried beneath snow, whispers that would not stay silent. A sharp crack jolted her upright, her breath catching. For a moment she thought it was just ice splintering under the cold, but then she heard it, a long, low sound that curled through the night air like smoke. A howl. It rose and fell with eerie precision, not the frenzied cry of a hungry beast, but something deeper, older, and far more deliberate. Alma's blood turned cold. She'd heard wolves before, back on the plains where the railroad stretched. But this was no ordinary wolf's cry. This sound carried weight, intention, as though whoever or whatever made it knew the cabin's walls could not keep it out. She turned toward the hearth where Colt had sat with his head tipped back, hat low over his brow, the rifle propped within reach. But he was no longer resting. He was standing now, tall and rigid, eyes fixed at the door, as though he had been waiting for this very moment. His revolver was already in his hand. "Colt," Alma whispered, clutching the quilt tighter around her shoulders. "What is it?" "Stay where you are," he said sharply. His voice was calm, too calm, like a river moments before it breaks into rapids. But Alma could not stay. She rose, drawn to the window by a force stronger than fear. Pressing her palm to the icy glass, she scanned the tree line at the edge of the moonlit prairie. First she saw only shadows, the hunched skeletons of pines heavy with snow, the long drifts that looked like white waves frozen mid-crash. Then movement caught her eye. A dark figure shifted against the snow, deliberate, powerful, too large to be any ordinary predator. Her heart lurched. She couldn't look away. The shape prowled just beyond the trees, its head low, its gait measured. It was watching. Colt was suddenly at her side. He yanked the curtain closed with such force the rod rattled against the wall. "I told you, don't look!" Alma's voice trembled. "What is it?" He didn't answer. He was already moving, checking the shutters, banking the fire lower, his every motion efficient, practiced, almost ritualistic. His shoulders had gone rigid, his jaw clenched tight. Another howl broke the silence, closer this time. It rattled through the valley like thunder rolling down from the mountains. Alma's knees weakened beneath her, and she clutched the edge of the table for support. Colt paused, revolver in hand, eyes narrowing at the door. Then he muttered low, almost to himself, "It's hunting." Her breath caught. Hunting what? He looked at her then, and for the first time she had met him, his silence cracked. His eyes weren't just wary, they were haunted. Recognition flickered in their depths, as though he knew exactly what stalked them beyond those walls. The sound came again. Not a howl this time, a scratch. Long, deliberate claws raking against the wood of the cabin wall. Alma stifled a cry, pressing her mouth against her hand. The sound traveled, screeping from one side of the cabin to the other, circling, testing, taunting. "Alma," Colt's voice cut sharp, commanding, "Corner, now!" She obeyed without thought, darting to the far corner by the bed, clutching the quilt around herself like a shield. Her body shook so violently she feared her bones might crack. Colt stood tall in the center of the cabin, revolver raised, shoulders squared. The firelight threw long shadows across his face, hardening his jaw, sharpening his eyes into something that no longer looked entirely human. Alma had the sudden, terrifying thought that perhaps the whispers weren't about the creature outside at all. Perhaps they were about the man inside. The door shuddered. A weight pressed against it, slow, deliberate. The iron latch groaned. Almost nails dug into the quilt. She wanted to scream at him, to beg him to tell her what was happening, what manner of beast prowled the snow outside, but her voice died in her throat. And then, words. They weren't words in any human tongue, not fully. They were shaped from a growl, rough and broken, but Alma heard them all the same. Sheriff. The sound slithered through the cracks in the wood, chilling the air itself. Alma gasped, her blood turning to ice. Wolves did not speak. Wolves did not call men by name. But Colt did not flinch. His jaw tightened, his grip on the revolver steady. He knew this voice. Alma's heart hammered. "Colt," she whispered, her voice shaking. "What is it? What's out there?" He finally looked at her, and for the first time she had met him, his silence cracked. His voice was rough, stripped bare. "It's not after you." His gaze was unyielding, a storm trapped in steel. "It's after me." The words fell between them like an axe, cleaving the last shred of safety she had felt in this place. The shutters rattled violently. Wood splintered. Snow sprayed inward through a sudden crack as something massive struck against the wall. Alma screamed. She curled into herself. And then she saw it. Through the brief gap in the shutters, the moonlight struck two eyes, burning, molten gold, fixed not on the cabin, not on her, but on Colt. A wolf, but not like any wolf she had ever imagined. Too large, too deliberate, its shape both beast and something unnervingly human. Colt raised his gun. The revolver thundered, deafening in the small cabin. The shutters blasted open, snow spraying into the room, firelight guttering. For an instant, she saw the creature fully, its fur dark as midnight, its fangs bared in a snarl, its body rippling with power unnatural for any animal. And worst of all, in its eyes, she saw intelligence, malice, recognition. The cabin filled with the stench of gunpowder and the echo of the shot. The beast vanished into the storm, but its howl rose again, louder than ever, echoing across the valley like the cry of something not born of this earth. Alma's chest heaved, tears burning her eyes. She looked at Colt, desperate for explanation. He stood in the snow-dusted wreckage of the shattered shutters, revolver still smoking, his face carved in stone. She whispered, her voice barely audible. "What are you, Colt?" For a beat of heart, he didn't answer. Then he turned, his eyes shadowed with something deeper than fear. "Not what you think," he said. His voice was low, dangerous, carrying a weight of truth she wasn't sure she wanted to hear. Outside, the howl came again, this time not one voice, but many. The night was no longer silent. It was alive with wolves, and Alma knew with a certainty that froze her blood, this was only the beginning.
Chapter 7. The Attack. The night had changed. Where before it was merely heavy and watchful, now it bristled with menace. Every gust of wind that howled through the cabin's broken shutters carried the scent of danger, sharp and feral, as though the storm itself had teeth. Alma pressed herself into the farthest corner of the cabin, the quilt clutched so tightly in her fists that her knuckles had turned white. Her breath came in short, ragged bursts, clouding in the freezing air. She could still hear the echo of Colt's revolver ringing in her ears. The image of that monstrous wolf burned into her mind like a brand. But the silence that followed the shot was worse than the sound. Colt stood unmoving by the shattered window, revolver raised, his silhouette etched in firelight and shadow. He did not lower his weapon, though the creature had vanished back into the storm. His body was rigid, every muscle taut, his ears straining to catch what Alma could not. He looked less like a man in that moment and more like some statue carved by a desperate hand, powerful, unyielding, yet carved from sorrow. Alma dared a whisper,
Is it gone? Colt's head turned slightly, just enough for her to glimpse his eyes in the dim light. They were not the calm, steady eyes of the sheriff she thought she had known. No, these were the eyes of someone cornered, haunted, hunted. "No," he said, voice like a blade cutting through the dark. "It's never gone." Before Alma could press him, the cabin shuddered violently. Something massive slammed against the far wall, sending a shower of dust and snow down from the rafters. Alma screamed and ducked, her heart slamming against her ribs. The wolves outside weren't retreating. They were circling, testing, waiting for the moment the walls gave way. Another slam, this time at the door. The latch groaned, wood creaked. Then came a chorus of howls, so close almost swore the voices were inside her skull. She clamped her hands over her ears, tears burning her eyes. This was no ordinary pack. This was something worse. Colt spun toward her, his voice snapping her upright. "Alma, under the bed, now!" She hesitated, her body frozen with terror. "Colt, Now!" he barked, and the sound of authority, of command, jolted her into motion. She scrambled across the floor, dragging the quilt with her, and slid beneath the bed frame just as another bone-rattling impact struck the cabin. Splinters rained from the door. The wolves were trying to break through. From under the bed, Alma saw Colt move like a shadow through the flickering firelight. He reloaded the revolver with swift, precise motions, then reached for the rifle propped against the hearth. His back was straight, his shoulders broad, his movements purposeful, yet there was something raw in them too. A man preparing for war, but against what? The question barely formed before the answer revealed itself. With a deafening crack, the door gave way. The wood split down the middle, snow blasting inward as the night itself seemed to pour inside. And through the wreckage, they came. The first wolf burst through like a nightmare given flesh, massive, fur black as midnight, its eyes burning gold, its fangs glistening with hunger. Its body rippled with unnatural strength, half beast, half something more, something wrong. It lunged for Colt, snarling with a sound that shook Alma's bones. Colt met him head-on. The rifle roared, the shot striking the beast square in the chest. It yelped, but did not fall, only staggered, snarling, louder, more enraged. Colt dropped the rifle and drew his revolver in one smooth motion, firing again and again, each shot echoing like thunder. The creature crashed into him. The two collided with a force that rattled the walls. Colt's body slammed hard against the table, splintering it beneath their weight. Alma screamed from her hiding place, the sound ripping her throat raw. She wanted to run to him, but fear chained her to the floor. The wolf snapped its jaws inches from Colt's face. He shoved an arm between them, straining with every ounce of his strength to keep its fangs from closing around his throat. His revolver clattered uselessly across the floor. For a moment Alma thought it was over, that Colt would be torn apart before her eyes. Then something happened. Colt's eyes flashed, just for an instant. In the firelight's flicker, they gleamed the same molten gold as the creature's. His face twisted, not in pain, but in something primal, something feral. With a guttural roar, he heaved the wolf off him, throwing it across the room with impossible strength. The beast crashed into the wall, the force so great that the cabin shook. Alma gasped, her blood running cold. She had seen it. She was certain. The same wildness that lived in the eyes of the creature outside now burned in Colt's eyes. But there was no time to question. The wolves weren't done. Another shape forced its way through the shattered doorframe, then another, 3, 4, Alma couldn't count them all. The cabin filled with snarling, snapping shadows, fur and fangs flashing in the firelight. Colt grabbed the poker from the hearth, its tip glowing red from the coals, and swung it with lethal precision. The hot iron seared fur and flesh, the smell of burning hide filling the cabin as one wolf yelped and recoiled. Yet for every one that fell back, another pressed forward. They were everywhere, circling, snapping, eyes glowing like embers in the night. Alma clutched her mouth with trembling hands, praying they would not find her beneath the bed. Colt fought like no man Alma had ever seen. He was everywhere at once, his movements fluid, almost animal. He wielded the poker, the knife at his belt, his bare fists, anything he could grasp. And yet the wolves pressed in, their growls rising in a chorus that seemed to shake the earth itself. One lunged toward the bed. Alma's scream tore through the cabin as claws raked the floorboards inches from her face. Colt spun, eyes blazing, and drove the glowing poker straight into the beast's flank. It shrieked, writhing, then fled back into the storm, smoke rising from the wound. Colt knelt, panting, blood on his face, his chest heaving. He glanced at Alma under the bed, his expression raw, desperate. Stay down, no matter what. Before she could answer, another impact rocked the cabin. This one not from claw or fang, but from something heavier, darker. The doorframe shattered further, and through it stepped not a wolf, but a figure. A shadow taller than any man, its body cloaked in fur and muscle, its eyes glowing brighter than the rest. The pack parted for it, almost reverent. The leader. It stepped forward, its claws dragging across the floor, sparks flying where they scraped stone. And when it spoke, Alma's heart nearly stopped. Sheriff. The voice was deep, guttural, but unmistakably human. It reverberated through the cabin, through her bones, through the very air. Colt froze, his jaw tightened, his grip on the poker firm. You should have stayed buried. The beast's laugh was a rumble, low and mocking. And you should have chosen the pack, brother. Alma's breath hitched. Brother? The truth struck like lightning. Colt was no mere sheriff. Whatever these creatures were, whatever nightmare had found them, Colt was part of it. The leader stepped closer, claws dragging across the floor, sparks flying where they scraped stone. You cannot protect her. You cannot protect this town. You were born to us, and you will return to us. Colt's answer was a roar, human and yet not, as he charged. The two collided in a clash of steel and fury, wolf and man locked in battle, the cabin caking with every blow. From under the bed, Alma wept silently, torn between terror and the dawning realization that the man who had saved her was not just a sheriff, not just a protector. He was something else, something that the wolves outside wanted and feared. The attack had begun, and Alma knew, with bone-deep certainty, that nothing in her life would ever be the same again.
Chapter 8. The Revelation. The cabin was in ruins. Splintered wood and blood spattered the floorboards. The fire sputtered low, smoke curling into the air like the remnants of some pagan sacrifice. The wind howled through shattered shutters, dragging snow into the room where it mingled with the stink of burned fur and gunpowder. Alma lay trembling beneath the bed, her body stiff, her heart beating in frantic jolts that left her breathless. Colt stood in the wreckage, shoulders heaving, chest streaked with blood, some of it his, more of it not. His revolver lay spent on the floor, the barrel blackened, but his hand still curled around it like he couldn't let it go. His other hand dripped red from a deep gash across his forearm. He was alive, but barely. The wolves had retreated into the storm, their howls echoing from the tree line, a chorus of hunger denied. Only one remained, its massive body sprawled lifeless near the hearth, steam rising from the blackened wound Colt had carved into its chest. But even in death, its golden eyes seemed to smolder as though mocking the man who had slain it. Alma crawled from beneath the bed, her movements slow, unsteady, her eyes locked on Colt. He swayed where he stood, exhaustion weighing on him, blood painting his shirt in dark patches. For a moment she thought he might collapse. Colt, her voice cracked, thin and broken. What are you?
His eyes flicked to her, and in that instant she saw it again, the molten gold, faint now, fading, but still there, not entirely gone. He didn't answer. Not right away. His jaw worked as if he were chewing on words too bitter to swallow. "You saw," he said at last, his voice low, ragged. Alma's lips trembled. "I saw you throw that thing across the room like it was nothing. I saw your eyes. I heard what it called you." She shook her head, her throat tight with panic. "Brother! He called you his brother!" Colt turned away, dragging a hand across his blood-streaked face. "Shouldn't ended this before it ever reached you," he muttered. "That thing spoke to you," Alma cried, her fear sharpening into fury. "It knew your name. It knew who you were. Don't you dare stand there and tell me nothing. I deserve the truth, Colt." The room went silent but for the snapping of the dying fire. He stood with his back to her, shoulders rigid, his shadow cast long against the ruined wall. Then slowly he lowered himself into the broken chair by the hearth. It groaned under his weight, but he didn't care. His hands trembled as he reached for the bottle of whiskey on the shelf, uncorked it with his teeth, and drank deep. When he finally spoke, his voice was stripped bare, every word heavy as iron. "They weren't wrong." He glanced at the corpse by the fire. "I was born into it, into them." Alma blinked, uncomprehending. "Into them?" Colt's gaze lifted, meeting hers across the room. The gold shimmered faintly in his eyes again, like embers refusing to die. "Wolves, Alma. Not the kind you've heard howling in the hills. Not beasts, not men. Both, and neither." Her stomach nodded. "You're saying you're one of them? That you're—" "I'm saying," he cut in, his voice sharp, "the blood in my veins ain't the blood of ordinary men. My father," his jaw tightened, "my father was their alpha. My mother didn't live long after she bore me. I was raised in the pack until I was old enough to see what they really were. Monsters, killers, feeding on fear as much as flesh." Alma's breath caught. "And you left." "I ran." His lips curled in a bitter smile. "Ran from them, ran from the blood that bound me to them. Thought I could bury it under a badge and a gun. Thought maybe if I put enough distance between myself and that life, I'd forget." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring into the fire. "But blood don't forget, and neither does the pack. I've been hiding from them for years. Tonight proves they finally found me." Alma's knees weakened, and she sank to the floor, clutching the quilt around her shoulders. The world tilted beneath her, her mind reeling. The sheriff, the man who had saved her life, who had fought for her, sheltered her, was not just a man. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered, tears burning her eyes. Colt's face hardened, his voice a growl. "Because the more you know, the closer it brings you to their jaws. They smell truth like blood, and I wasn't about to make you their prey." Her heart clenched. She wanted to believe him, wanted to cling to the man who had fought like the devil himself to keep her alive. But the image of his golden eyes seared her thoughts, and with it a question she was terrified to ask. "Colt, are you one of them now?" The silence stretched until it felt unbearable. He lifted his head, meeting her gaze, and for the first time she saw the full weight of the curse he carried. "I fight it every day," he said, his voice raw, trembling with the fury that wasn't aimed at her, but at himself. "Every full moon, every shadow in the night, it calls me back, the beast in me, their brother, their blood. And if I lose,
Then I ain't the man you think I am. I'm just another wolf in the dark. Her tears spilled hot down her cheeks. She rose to her knees, inching closer despite the terror in her veins. But you're not them. Tonight proved that too. You fought them. You protected me. Colt shook his head, a hollow laugh breaking from him. You don't understand. Killing them don't make me different. It makes me worse. One day the line between me and them, his voice cracked. One day it'll vanish. She reached out, her hand trembling, and set it gently over his blood-stained hand. His breath shuddered, his jaw clenching as if he wanted to pull away. But he didn't. For the first time that night, his shoulders eased, the storm inside him quieting, if only a fraction. Outside, the wolves howled again, distant but lingering, a reminder that this was not over. The leader's words still hung in the air like smoke. Brother. Alma glanced toward the shattered doorway, then back at Colt. They won't stop, will they? He shook his head slowly. No, not until I'm back among them, or dead. Her hand tightened around his. Then we fight, together. For a long moment, he simply stared at her, as though testing the truth in her eyes. Then slowly he nodded. The revelation was out, the lies buried. The night's attack became changed. Alma knew, as the fire burned low and the wolves howled on the horizon, that the sheriff she thought she knew was gone. In his place was something else, something broken, cursed, and dangerous, but also, perhaps, something worth saving.
Chapter 9. Love and Destiny. The fire had dwindled to embers, their faint glow the only light in the shattered cabin. Smoke and ash hung in the air, clinging to every breath, and the silence that followed the night's battle pressed heavy on Alma's chest. She sat beside Colt, her hands still trembling where they rested over his blood-stained ones, afraid that if she let go, the storm outside would swallow him whole. He had told her the truth. The revelation still churned in her heart like a storm. The sheriff she thought she knew was a wolf's son, cursed by blood, hunted by his own kind. And yet, as she looked at him now, broken and bruised but alive, she knew with startling clarity that truth had not changed how she saw him. It had only sharpened it. Colt leaned back in the broken chair, eyes shut, chest rising and falling in shallow, ragged breaths. His shirt clung to his skin, damp with sweat and blood, torn where claws had raked him. His revolver lay on the floor, useless, but his hand had not released it fully until her touch anchored him. She had seen men fight for their lives before, but never with the fury, the feral fire she had witnessed in him tonight. Colt, she whispered, her voice raw, fragile as glass. He opened his eyes. They caught the faint glow of the embers, and for a moment she swore she saw the gold flare again, not the wild, consuming blaze of the beast, but something gentler, restrained. You should sleep, he said quietly. His voice was rough, broken at the edges. The night ain't done. You'll need your strength. Alma shook her head. I won't sleep, not while you're bleeding, not while you're carrying this alone. His lips twitched, not quite a smile, not quite denial. He looked away, jaw tightening as if words battled inside him. There are things in me you don't want to see, Alma, things no woman should carry. Then let me decide that, she said firmly, surprising even herself with the strength in her tone. She tightened her grip on his hand. You fought them, Colt. You fought yourself. You've kept this town safe, even while you're drowning under it. Don't you dare tell me I don't get to stand with you. For a long moment, he said nothing. The storm outside howled, rattling the broken shutters, a reminder that the night was far from over. Then slowly, his gaze returned to her, and there was something naked in his eyes. Fear, yes,
but something else too, a longing so deep it shook her. "Why?" he said low, almost breaking. "Why would you tie yourself to a man who carries death in his blood, who may wake tomorrow more beast than man?" Alma's chest ached. She reached up, her fingers brushing lightly against the cut on his cheek. He flinched, not from pain, but from the tenderness, as though it was more than he could bear. "Because I've seen the man you are," she whispered, "the one who stood between me and death again and again, the one who fought his own blood to protect me. You think that curse makes you theirs? No, Colt, it makes you mine. Because every time you fight it, every time you choose me, you prove you're not them, you're more." His breath shuddered. She saw the walls crumbling, the mask he had worn for years breaking piece by piece. "You don't know what you're saying," he rasped, though his hand rose, trembling, to catch hers where it rested on his face. "If you tie yourself to me, Alma, there's no untying it. My life is danger. My destiny is blood." She leaned closer, her eyes never leaving his. "Then let it be our destiny. Love isn't safe. It never was. But it's stronger than any curse." For the first time in years, perhaps in his life, Colt let go. His defenses, his resistance, all the barriers he had built to keep others safe crumbled under the weight of her truth. He pulled her to him, and their lips met, not the hesitant brush of fear, but the fierce, consuming kiss of two souls who had already lost too much to waste another breath in silence. The kiss tasted of smoke and salt, of blood and sorrow, but also of fire, burning, undeniable fire. Alma clung to him, her fingers threading through his hair, as though she could hold the storm at bay with her touch alone. Colt's arms circled her, pulling her against him, his body trembling with the force of restraint he fought to keep. For in that kiss, the beast stirred, hungry, longing. But it was not hunger for flesh that consumed him. It was her. When they finally broke apart, both gasping for breath, Alma rested her forehead against his. "There," she whispered, "that's the truth I choose. Not the pack, not the curse. You." Colt closed his eyes, and for the first time she felt the storm inside him quiet, if only for a moment. He held her like a man starved, like a man who had never dared believe he could have this. And in that silence, something shifted. It was not just love, it was destiny. The bond between them deepened, invisible yet unbreakable, woven in blood, fire, and choice. Alma felt it as surely as the beating of her own heart. She was tied to him now, not by fear or circumstance, but by something greater. And yet the world would not grant them peace. The wolves howled again, closer this time, their voices rising in a terrible chorus that carried through the broken cabin walls. Colt's head snapped toward the sound, his body tensing once more. The pack had not retreated far. They lingered, waiting, watching. "They know," he murmured, his voice dark. "They can feel it, the bond." Alma swallowed hard, but her grip on him did not falter. "Then let them feel it, because it means you've chosen, and so have I." His eyes met hers, gold and human all at once, and for the first time he did not deny it. He bent his head and kissed her again, slower this time, sealing it, not in desperation, but in promise. When he drew back, his voice was steady, firm, carrying a weight that felt like an oath. "If this is destiny, then I'll carry it, with you, to the end." Alma's heart swelled, tears burning her eyes. She nodded, her voice breaking, but sure. "To the end." The night pressed on, but something had changed irrevocably. No matter what came when dawn broke, whether blood or battle or redemption, Alma and Colt would face it together. Not sheriff and stranger, not man and beast, but bound souls, love and destiny entwined. Outside, the storm raged.
Inside, 2 hearts burned brighter than any curse. And though danger still waited in the shadows, Alma knew one truth that nothing, not wolves, not curses, not death, could take from her. Colt was hers, and she was his.
Chapter 10. The Bride's Redemption. The howls thickened the night like smoke, a low and rising chorus that seemed to claw at the cabin walls. Alma pressed her hand to Colt's chest, feeling his heart hammer against her palm, each beat carrying the weight of defiance and fate. He had promised her to the end, but she knew the end would not wait quietly. It was here, outside, circling. Colt rose slowly, his movements strained but steady. He was a man bleeding, battered, but still unbroken. His revolver, emptied of bullets, hung heavy at his side. His knife, slick with blood, gleamed faintly in the ember light. When his gaze met Alma's, the gold in his eyes was no longer just a flicker. It was fire. "They'll come at dawn," he said, his voice low, tight. "Pack hunts best in the half-light. We've got hours, maybe less." Alma swallowed, her throat raw. She should have been afraid. The storm outside howled like the voices of the dead, the earth itself shuddering under the weight of unseen feet. But she wasn't afraid, not anymore. She had chosen, and her choice was standing before her, bloodied and resolute, a man carved from both light and shadow. "Then we meet them, together," she whispered. Colt's jaw tightened. For a heartbeat, she thought he might tell her no, that he might command her to hide, to run, to leave him to face the storm alone. But instead, he simply nodded, a silent vow. They spent the hours before dawn in the fragile quiet of the cabin, binding wounds with strips of torn cloth, sharpening blades, feeding the fire until it roared back to life. The snow outside never ceased, a curtain of white that blurred the world into something unreal. And yet, within those walls, everything was sharpened, every glance, every touch, every heartbeat. Alma felt it most when Colt reached for her hand. His calloused fingers wrapped around hers, grounding her. "Alma," he murmured, his voice rough, "if I fall—" "You won't," she cut in, fierce and certain. He gave a half-smile, broken and beautiful. "If I fall, you run. Don't look back. Don't let them take you." She shook her head, tears burning hot against the frozen air. "Don't you dare ask that of me. If you fall, I fall. That's the vow we made." Something in him broke then, not in weakness, but in surrender to her truth. He bent and kissed her, the kind of kiss that steals breath and time, a kiss that promised both farewell and forever. When they pulled apart, the horizon was already paling with the faintest, cruelest light of dawn. The first howl rose as the sky shifted from black to bruised gray. Then another, then many. The pack was coming. Colt stood tall, every inch of him braced for war. Alma stood at his side, a kitchen blade clutched tight in her hand, her cloak wrapped around her shoulders like armor. She was no warrior, no hunter of beasts, but she was his, and that was enough. The snow broke. Shadows surged from the tree line, figures half man, half wolf, their eyes burning like coals in the storm. The pack came swift and silent, their breath steaming in the bitter cold, their claws carving through snow and earth alike. Colt met them head-on. The first beast lunged, its maw gaping wide, and Colt's knife flashed, steel meeting flesh in a spray of blood and snow. Alma cried out, driving her blade into another that broke through, her arm shaking with the force, but finding its mark. The creature shrieked, its eyes locking with hers before it crumpled into the drifts.
The world became chaos. Howls, steel, screams, the storm itself seeming to rage in tandem with the battle. Colt moved like a force of nature, his body a blur of man and wolf, his strikes precise, merciless, but there were too many. For every beast that fell, another rose from the white. "Alma!" Colt roared, slashing down another. But Alma did not falter. She struck again and again, her fear transmuted into fire. Every breath she drew was a vow. She would not leave him. She would not break. The alpha emerged as dawn tore through the sky, a towering beast, larger than the rest, its fur black as shadow, its eyes molten gold. Colt froze when he saw it, his knife lowering for the briefest instant. Alma understood. This was no ordinary wolf. This was blood, kin, perhaps father, perhaps brother, the beast that carried Colt's curse in full measure. The alpha bared his teeth, and in its growl was recognition, claim. "No!" Alma screamed, her voice cutting through the storm. She threw herself between them, blade raised, eyes blazing. "He is not yours. He is mine." The wolf lunged. Time fractured. Colt moved faster than thought, his body colliding with Alma's, shoving her aside as the beast struck. Claws raked his chest, tearing deep, blood spilling into snow. He staggered, but did not fall. His knife found flesh, burying itself in the alpha's side. The creature howled, thrashing, dragging Colt with it. Alma screamed his name, fighting to reach him, but the pack closed in, circling, their eyes glinting with hunger and fury. "Colt!" He turned, his face pale, blood soaking his shirt, his eyes blazing gold. "Alma," he gasped, "run!" But Alma did not run. She lifted her blade, tears streaming hot against the frozen air, and charged. The pack lunged to stop her. She cut one down, then another, her arms burning, her body screaming with pain and cold. She reached Colt, who was pinned beneath the alpha, its jaws snapping inches from his throat. Without thinking, without hesitation, she drove her blade into its heart. The wolf screamed, a sound that split the earth, that shook the storm itself. Its body convulsed, shuddered, then collapsed. The pack froze. One by one they lowered their heads. A mournful howl rose before they melted back into the snow, vanishing into the trees. Silence fell. Alma dropped to her knees beside Colt, blood soaking the snow around him. His breath was shallow, his eyes half closed, the gold dimming. "Colt," she whispered, clutching his face, shaking. "Stay with me. Please, don't you dare leave me." His lips curved faintly. "You saved me." "You saved me first," she choked out. "We saved each other. That's what love is." His hand rose weakly, brushing her cheek. "Alma, my bride." That word shattered her. She pressed her lips to his, desperate, pouring every breath, every heartbeat, every ounce of life she had into him. When she pulled back, she whispered fiercely, "You're not dying here. Not like this. Not now. Our story doesn't end in the snow." Something shifted then, not in the storm, not in the world, but in Colt himself. His breath deepened, his eyes flickered open, gold flaring bright. The curse, the blood, the beast, it bent, not in fury, but in surrender to her, to their bond. He lived. The storm broke as the sun crested the horizon, spilling light across the blood-stained snow. The cabin stood battered, but unbroken, and so did they. Two souls bound not by fate's cruelty, but by love's defiance. Colt leaned against her, his body weak, but his spirit fierce. "Alma," he whispered, "you redeemed me." She kissed his forehead, her tears falling into his hair. "No, Colt, we redeemed each other." And as the dawn spread its light across the silent, snowbound land, Alma knew one truth with unshakable certainty. The bride's redemption was not only his, it was theirs.
If you loved this story, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you want more stories like this one, make sure to subscribe and give this video a like. Until the next video, stay inspired.